Welcome to Tentative Title with Tim. This is a podcast about creativity, about process, about filmmaking, and about screenwriting. Welcome, everybody, back to the podcast. And we are a week into 2022. Honestly, for me, it kind of felt like it was a month. It just seemed like time was dragging by. But, what are you going to do? So, today's topic is one that I have not touched upon at all in all the time that I've been doing this podcast. And that is dialogue. Now, what is the purpose of dialogue? Well, the purpose of dialogue is not simply for characters to talk, because if characters talk, then they could say things that are just completely boring, especially if you take, a slice of life from their daily life. It could be completely just the most boring thing you could ever watch, because it's not driving anything forward. It's meandering. It's talking about things that aren't essential to whatever story that they are in the middle of. So dialogue serves a purpose, and it also, you can have a complete narrative without dialogue as well. Like in A Quiet Place, there's maybe, I don't even know if there is any dialogue. There maybe is a couple lines here or there, but for the most part, it's a silent film. And even with this movie that came out, I think in 2015, called All Is Lost with Robert Redford, it's just him on a boat dealing with problems. He's on the sea. He's just dealing with things falling apart and trying to stay alive. And he says maybe one line in the entire movie. So, I mean, that begs the question, is dialogue really necessary? Now, if you're somebody who loves Quentin Tarantino, if you're someone who loves Aaron Sorkin, you will, look at that question and say, it is essential. It is dialogue is everything. And I'm there with you because I got my start in the theater. Theater is all about dialogue. Theater is all about people talking out their thoughts and their emotions and their feelings. Everything is dialogue. I mean, granted, there are, different ways in which they can convey certain things. They can use lighting, they can use dance, they can use the movement of their bodies, they can use any number of other ways to convey a story. But the essential way is through talking, through dialogue. And I can't believe that, we're in a point in cinema where it feels like, we're kind of in that mode of making everything seem like theater, which is really bizarre because, like I said, I love dialogue. I love what dialogue can do. But it seems like everything that has come out now is more of just talking. And I'm like, well, that doesn't make any sense because this is cinema. This is this is supposed to be, we're supposed to see things happening. And the fact that we have the ability to create images to convey meaning and to convey emotion, it's well, do we really need characters telling us who they are and what it is that they're after? And I have to say that the answer is somewhere in the middle. And I've been watching some older movies recently, and there is some great scenes in which two characters are in a room talking, and I am riveted because of the fact that there's this context around what it is they both want. And as they're talking, they're trying to get information from each other, and they're trying to dance around the issue, and there's so much tension there that it's really about how the narrative is set up. And so dialogue is important for one, allowing the audience to know exactly what a character is thinking for sure. And also to move the plot forward, especially if it's something like a mystery, a thriller, a drama in which, we're trying to, the narrative is trying to unfold this like to a it's like with characters trying to find answers. And I'm very fascinated by the fact that some movies work really well with dialogue and other movies just fall apart with dialogue. And I can only come to the point with the fact that, like, sometimes the dialogue that is put into movies doesn't need to be there. Like, there have been plenty of times when I've watched something and I thought, could you have just shown this? Like, do we have to have a scene in which people are talking about this? And I always come back to the example in Braveheart. There was apparently a 2-page scene where this one character is expressing his loyalty to William Wallace, and it's just this long, drawn-out kind of like scene that was written on the page. And on set, they looked at that and they were like, "This is just it works on the page, but there's a better way that we can do this." And if you remember the movie, there's a scene where William Wallace is out hunting a deer, and all of a sudden he turns around and he sees one of the other characters running towards him with a sword, and it looks like he's attacking him. And he has a sword up above his head, and he's like, it looks like he's about to chop William Wallace down. And William Wallace turns his bow towards that character, about to shoot him, and the guy throws his sword. It misses William Wallace, and it hits the guy behind him who was the one who was going to kill him. And that took a 2 to 3 page scene of dialogue, and without a single word, showed the loyalty of this character to William Wallace. And I always come back to that story because it makes so much sense. You show a character, like, a character is what they do, not what they say. If anything, when you have dialogue, you can have a character lie to you through the entire film, through the entire show, with what they say, but it's what they do that actually proves who they are. And that's why I come back to the question of, like, is dialogue necessary? And I want to say that it is necessary because, people talk to each other, people say things to each other, and we can have fun as filmmakers and as writers, putting in the context of what is being said. Because a character could say, "It's a nice morning today," and the context could be, "I'm going to kill you." As opposed to somebody giving a look and being like, "Well, that I'm like having a shot of somebody giving a look, having a shot of a knife, the flicking out, that's the fun with cinema, is that there are so many ways in which you can convey the same thing, and it all depends on if you want to show it through action or if you want to show it through what people say or through what characters say. Now, for me, I love being able to have characters talk. Like I said, I'm from the theater. I love having those scenes where characters are just talking, but there's this context, there's this underlying, tension going on between the characters. And if you do it right, the audience will see those words being said, and just like they know that something bigger is happening. And I wanted to, kind of bring that to the writing part of dialogue. Now, I've written some scripts, and I've had some scripts been made, and when I write a script, I have an idea of like how I think the line should be said, how like what's happening with the characters, and it's never what it ends up being on screen. And that's a good thing and that's a bad thing, because sometimes when you're on set and you hear the actors saying the words that you've written, you realize that maybe most of those words didn't need to be said in the first place. That it was actually just, you were using the music of the dialogue as you were writing the scene. But when you get on set, you realize, oh no, like the characters already like are looking at each other in a certain way, or they're acting, they're moving around the set in a certain way that actually conveys what is said in the dialogue. And so you can completely cut most of what's there. But when you're writing, sometimes you're thinking about the scene, you're thinking about what's happening depending on where it is in the movie, and you kind of get used to a certain blocking, a certain tone as you're in the script, but it doesn't translate to the screen. And it's been for me, it's been a learning process because like I said, I've come from the theater, and so when I write dialogue, sometimes I'm writing dialogue that is very like just they're saying the characters are saying what they think, and I've tried as much as possible to make it more of a like subtext, or trying to make it so that when characters are saying something that there's something more to it. But to be honest, there are plenty of times when I've written dialogue and I reread it and I'm like, this character doesn't need to say this. Like, it's not important, or it's not driving the narrative forward. There's nothing useful in what is being said. I need to cut this, or it's like it's not what the character would do. And that's something you kind of learn as you do it, because when you look at it on the page, when you look at a scene, it can read really well. It can, you could find no fault in a scene, but you give it to an actor, and an actor has their own ideas about how the character would say certain things, or just their natural cadence is different than what you had in your head. And that can be a good thing and a bad thing. And, I've been lucky that for the most part, what the actors have brought to the parts that I've written has been much better than I had in my head when I was writing it. And they brought something else to it. They brought a physicality. They brought, their own kind of, attitude, I guess, you could say, to the character. And so that changed the meaning of a line or the reading of a line. And I got to say that's like the most exciting part of the process, is that, you have this script, you think it's like flawless, and then you give it to actors, and actors take it to another level. And then you realize all that writing maybe wasn't as necessary, and you can start cutting because the actors are doing more with what they're not saying than with what they're saying. And, I know this episode is about dialogue and trying to really just talk about how, dialogue is really essential, because I believe it is. Dialogue is an art form that is important. And depending on what kind of style you're going for, like I said, if you're into Tarantino, if you're into Aaron Sorkin, like what they write is dialogue driven. It's very important of what is being said, sometimes even more than what the characters are doing or what they mean when they say it. It's all about just talking out the what's going on in their head, or what is happening in the situation. And I'm all for monologues. Monologues are can be done really well. Case in point, I just watched Midnight Mass last year, and there are a handful of monologues in that show that you know, when you're in the scene, you don't realize that they're going to launch into a monologue. Like, it's not one of those things where they're like, okay, now it's time for me to like do a monologue. But they do. The characters will launch into a monologue, and it is the most heartbreaking, beautiful writing that you know, you'd ever hear. And it's because of the actors, what they bring to the, you know, those monologues, but it's also about the words themselves and what they mean to the characters, and what they're finally able to like have a breath where they can express themselves. And that is like a very beautiful thing that you can give to an actor, is if you can give them just screen time in which they can breathe and talk through a monologue and really show some emotion, really show some like some hills and valleys in terms of their performance in a single take. Like that is, it's so great to watch when it's done right. When it's done wrong, it can be very cringe, and you're like, can this monologue please be done? Because yeah, we don't need this monologue here. It doesn't belong here, and I don't understand why they're launching into a monologue at this point. Can we just not do this? Which I've seen it done badly, and I've seen it done right. And you know, it's, you know, when it's done right because you're there with the characters, you understand why they're saying what they're saying. And when it's done the wrong way, you're like, please, can you stop? Please, can we move on to another scene? Because what you're saying could be either shown or could be done in a different way, or whatever. You know, just like there are any number of ways to like fix the problem that is so blatant in the writing and just the way it was produced. So dialogue is definitely important. I think it's one of those key you know, things that like we all understand. We all talk to each other. We all end up you know, in conversations and in you know, when we're trying to figure out what's going on, or what you know, we end up you know, kind of like picking apart each other's words because of like the fact that we know that you know, some people are trying to protect other people. Some people are don't actually say what they mean or what they feel, and so we're constantly as human beings picking apart what people are saying, because we suspect that there's always something underneath. There's always a subtext. There's always there's always more to what's being said, and it's very jarring sometimes when you know, a character says something that they mean, and in fact it kind of like, it makes us feel a bit more confident, but we also have grown to suspect that if a character says what they mean, that there's got to be something more to it. It can never be that it's just like they said this and they're gonna go do it. You know, like I mean, granted, you can have a character like that, but there's always something behind that. There's always a reason behind why a character is saying something. And as writers, as filmmakers, as people who are trying to make stories, finding that context in what your characters are saying is going to allow you to cut the stuff that doesn't need to be there. Because if you have dialogue that is just boring, it's like, oh, I did a slice of life, you know, I heard this on you know, the train when I was like going to work. You know, it's like, that may be realistic, it may be true to life, but it doesn't serve your narrative, and it's boring. And the trick is to, if you want to have realistic dialogue, if you want to have things that are true to life, finding a way in which you can have a character say those things and have it apply to the narrative, have it show something about their character, have it be a way in which they relate to somebody else. Because if you have dialogue scenes that are realistic and they just don't move the plot forward, cut them. Like, you'd cut as much dialogue as you can if it doesn't, if it doesn't move the story forward, if it doesn't tell something about the characters, if it doesn't convey something about the overall story, because the audience is going to get it from what the characters are doing, from there are so many different ways in which you can tell the same kind of information, and you don't have to have a character tell the audience who they are or what it is they're doing. You don't have to do that. They will see by what the character does, who they are, and what they want. And I know, like, especially with like mainstream movies, it's very easy to look at those and say, well, this character says what they want right at the beginning, and I believe them, and they go and they try to get that, and yeah, they do. But then you're kind of like, well, did they really need to tell me what they wanted? I mean, they're not telling the audience necessarily. Like, usually it's hidden within a scene in which a character is like, hey, you, what it is you want? Oh, actually, I want to be a star basketball player. Oh, okay, well, you're not any good, so you're gonna have to have some more practice. Oh, okay. Like a scene that is so just straightforward, and it's just like, oh no, how about we show the character, like on the basketball court, like watching other people like do some great plays, and then having them try to like shoot a basket and maybe failing, but then being very determined that they're gonna make that one shot because they never have like made a shot before. There's so many different ways, especially with cinema, to show instead of tell. But I have to say, dialogue is also important. Like I said, like there are moments when you've run out of ways to show what a character wants and how to drive the narrative forward, and now you need to show the character talking to somebody, or somebody talking to the character, to kind of drive the narrative forward, because if you don't have that, sometimes you can't move the narrative forward without some character saying something. Like I said, there's the exceptions. Like if you have The Quiet Place, you know that these characters can't talk, because if they talk, then it means that they could possibly die. And that's a great tension to have. It's a great idea for a thriller, and it was mesmerizing to see a film that relied so little on dialogue. And even with the film All Is Lost, just watching Robert Redford on a boat trying to solve the problem of his boat, like, almost sinking, and having to find ways in which, he needs to kind of like fix the problems that are happening, and he's stuck in a storm, and then, like he has to deal with his, taking on water, and then he has to get on a raft, and like the entire time, like there's no reason for him to talk. It's not realistic for him to like spring into a monologue about, oh man, why did I go on this trip? I shouldn't have gone on the water. I should have gone on a train or a plane. Like he doesn't. The narrative doesn't rely on that. It relies on the power of Robert Redford acting and reacting to what is happening to the situation, and the way in which he deals with it. That's what that movie is about. And it's a lot it's a lot of fun to watch, because of the fact that like you realize that it doesn't need dialogue in order to be good. And we need the Quentin Tarantino's with the full monologues, and we need other films like A Quiet Place where it relies very little on dialogue, if any. They're both very important, and it really depends on what kind of story you're trying to tell and what information you need to convey. And, I guess my key takeaway with this is that if the characters have nothing of use to say to move the plot forward, then don't have them say it. Have them do something. Find an action that they can do in order to drive the plot forward. If it's essential for them to say something, if they have to engage in a conflict, if they have to, talk to somebody that they don't want to talk to because that character is a gatekeeper, it's like, then yes, have that scene and fill it with all kinds of like subtext and just like make it the most dramatic, tense scene that you can make it for that character, because it's an obstacle. And they need to overcome that obstacle, and they need to find a way around that obstacle. And that's the fun of what we do as storytellers is putting up these roadblocks, putting up things in the way for our characters to have to figure out how to get through. And they can either talk their way, around it or through it or whatever, or they use their knowledge, they put that into action to get what they want. But let's not just fall back on dialogue, because dialogue in a lot of ways is very lazy, and it happens so often nowadays that I'm like, can we just stop with the talking? Look at me. I'm on a podcast. I'm saying stop with the talking. But in terms of the narrative, it's like there's so many there's so many different ways that and creative ways that a scene could have unfolded, but they decided to just have the two characters talk and then tell each other who they are instead of making it a really interesting scene where maybe a character is trying to hide something from the other character, or or another character reveals something very sacred to the other one, or there's any number of things within the context of the story that you can do, and it doesn't have to be through the dialogue. It can be any number of ways. So yeah, like I said, coming from theater, I love dialogue. I love actors engaging with one another in a tit for tat kind of like standoff with words. And words can be musical, they can be beautiful, and they can really it's like the words can do so much when we hear them say, like when we hear a line of dialogue that's beautiful, it can really, change our perspective on things. But if it's jumbled up with all this nonsense of a character just talking, then we never catch the nuance, we never catch the power of that one line. And I think maybe that's my point, is that, if there's a powerful line that needs to be said, make sure that is the most important thing that character says, and then cut everything else out. So, all right, guys, this is it. Let me know your shots. Let me know your thoughts on dialogue. Do you love dialogue? Do you hate dialogue? Are you good at it? Are you bad at it? What movies do you love that have like paragraphs of dialogue? What movies do you love that have no dialogue? I want to hear from you. I want to know if I want to watch those movies. If you have any great recommendations, or if I've seen it before, I'd love to talk to you about it. Because hey man, cinema is storytelling. It's beautiful. It's great. It's an art form that, I hope we have with us for 1,000 more years, because we can say so much with a picture and sometimes dialogue. All right, guys, until the next one. If you'd like to connect with me, there is an email for the podcast. It's tentative.title.with.tim.podcast @gmail.com. There's also a Twitter account. The handle is @title_Tim. There's also a Facebook page where you can post questions, or you can connect with me there. Thank you guys for listening. I'll talk to you on the next one.